Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ask a Death Doula. Don't forget that the Good Death Seminar Series is on now. It is a live free series. It's normally $97 per session. It is now free to sign up. It is amazing. There are no replays. So if you want to join the next one, be sure to click the link below. Meet us in community. We're going to have workbooks. We're going to have exercises. They have been just incredible. The Good Death Seminar Series, click the link below. Okay, today we're going to talk about how to be a confident caregiver. This is my life's work, is to help people learn the skills, be empowered with information and education so that they can, when the time is called, to show up for those they love and care for them, just as your parents and people cared for you when you came into this world. The same is what we're going to be asked to do for not only family members, but for even friends, community members, just knowing what it is to have choices and be understanding about the role of a caregiver and what options there are changes everything for that very stressful, often very stressful, and right now, a time in most people's lives that are not going well. And I want to share with you that I was on a business call today, and there were 8 people on that call today. And 2 of them were talking about horrific experiences that they had caring for their aging parents without a roadmap, without a blueprint, without a manual book, not knowing how to navigate, and how incredibly difficult that was. There is a roadmap now. There is a blueprint. There is training for you. And we're going to cover really important things about how to be a confident caregiver and what you really need to know so that when the time comes, you can show up to care for those that you love at the end of life with confidence, with the knowledge to do that and to do it really well. Okay. So for me, it's really in 3 different chunks and categories that I want to give you this education. Number 1, the importance of planning ahead. I cannot emphasize this enough. You know, there's lots of talk right now about the death doula movement. Amazing, beautiful movement. By the way, if I may, a doula giver's pearl, when we bring back the sacredness of death, the awareness of death, the truth about death, the sacredness about it, we're bringing back the sacredness of life. They're not exclusive of one another. You know, lots of you know I have a book right now that's in pre-launch mode called The Good Death, and it's really the good life, because it is so full of inspiring, beautiful, empowering stories about how to live and live at the fullest expression of being a human being. And it's just so beautiful. So they're not exclusive of one another. So I really want us to settle into that when we're talking about end of life care, it is not depressing. Yes, it can be super hard. And what's making it so hard is the removal of any of the conversation and knowledge about it. But we're going to change that today, right? We're changing that with lots of things that we're doing. So I want to talk to you about the death doula movement and how beautiful that movement is. And we know that it's incredibly beautiful. But I have to tell you this, a good end of life, a good death, is not when a death doula swoops in at the end and cares for that patient and that family. That's not. It's usually very stressful at that moment. It's usually, if they have not planned ahead and this came about, it's usually, okay, how do we manage symptoms that are going on? How do we get some respite care for the caregiver? It's always kind of chasing behind it. A good end of life, a true good end of life, is starting way back here with thinking about and picking choices of what I would want or not want for end of life care, and starts way back here for caregivers to learn what's important to know about when we get to that space, caring for my mom or caring for my dad. What does that look like? So the first phase of what we're going to talk about is planning ahead. And I'm going to share with you some really important questions that you want to think about. Now, we're in an unprecedented time right now where we have an aging population like we have never seen before in history. So we have never seen the aging demographic like we have right now. So that is a challenge. Why? Because we don't have the setup to care for them. So we never want to go down a negative road here. We always want to be positive and think of all the things that we can do, because I think that when there are incredible challenges, there's there's an incredible opportunity to create new things for better outcomes and moving into the future. And this is one of them. So the reality is that we've never seen an aging demographic like we have the one now. So just statistically, within the last 100 years, the length of life has practically doubled. 100 years ago, it was 46. Today, it's 80, 81. And with that, so you might say, well, it's great, we're living longer. Hold on for a minute with that. And I know that there's part of that that can be true. But usually when people live longer, decades longer, they're living with multiple challenges, physical challenges, cognitive, mental challenges, financial challenges, all of the above. And when we don't have anything to go by, we don't have a setup for it. We don't have setups for this aging demographic shift in the medical system. We don't have it in housing. We don't have it at all. So we need to say, okay, what is the reality here and what kind of plans? What do we need to think about so that we're not caught in a place of scrambling? We're not caught in a place of making decisions out of fear, and we're not caught in a place where the quality of life is dramatically compromised for my mom or my dad or whoever it is for you. So the reality is knowing that a lot of us it's called the sandwich generation, a lot of us that are in our 40s, 50s, maybe even 60s, but it's really around that 40s, 50s, are going to be looking at caring for our aging parents. I know that I have two beautiful parents. One just turned 86, the other is 85, and they're doing, knock on wood, they're doing great. But I know that it's inevitable that one day this time obviously is going to be there. And I know that I'm going to be asked to show up for them. And I want to show up for them. Of course, I want to show up for them. I want to show up for them in the fullest way that I possibly can. Part of that is knowing what they want. And part of that is having these conversations so that when I'm the one speaking for them, advocating for them, making those decisions for them, speaking for them. So I want to clarify, speaking decisions for them. I've already had the conversation with them and they've already told me what they want. So now I'm not in a position where I'm making choices for them. I am actually speaking the choices and decisions that they've already made, that they've shared with me. And there's a huge difference there. And it's really freeing to know that you are just the voice for your mom and what she would want. Now, the real problem that's happening here is that people, number one, don't know that they have choices that they should be thinking about. And number two is that death is the number one fear in the world. And so what do we do with things that we fear for the most part? We usually avoid them entirely. This conversation about death and about what we would want or not want is usually completely avoided. And so when mom gets sick and she's not able to articulate, and usually at that point, you can't even really have these discussions, we're left to try and figure it out. And that's not the time to do that. So I want to give you some really good questions that I want you to think about asking people you love, even for yourself. What would you, when we age, where would we like to be? And what I teach my Doulagiver graduates is this. When you're working with families on your care consultant, you're planning ahead advanced care, which by the way is such an important thing. You want to have them pick a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. So what is plan A? Plan A is if you could have anything you want, if you could dream of the best aging scenario for yourself, mom, what would that be? And I'll use myself as an example. And I'm not quite sure yet because I fall in love with different places and different things. But I think practically as I'm aging, what is really important to me? It's important to me to be able to go out and to walk in nature. And so, there's a responsibility for me to make sure that I'm taking care of this beautiful body and doing exercise and feeding it nutrition and all those good things, but also to be in a place where I'm easily able to access a park to walk in, food to get, some, other cultural things that I like to do. And so, in one sense, and I'll just use it as an example, New York City, that is my birthplace, is a very special place in my heart. And it would be, in fact, I was just leaving New York City I was just leaving New York City about, well, now it's a week and a half. It's kind of a blur because if you all know, we had two horrific hurricanes that, made their way, and affected just so many people. I was in between the first one. I went on a business trip to New York. Actually, I went up to see my parents. My mom had her knee replaced, so I wanted to go visit. And I was told about a second hurricane coming from somebody. And I could not believe that another hurricane had turned around that quickly. And I remember that I had to get home and get my dog, that people were starting to evacuate, and I couldn't believe it. And I remember being up at 3 o'clock in the morning to take the first flight out of New York City to Tampa. And I was leaving the apartment at about 4:15 a.m. And there was this sweet older man with a cup of coffee coming in the building. And he said, "Where are you headed to?" And I told him, and he said, you know, he said, "I thought about moving to Florida when I retired." He said, "But," he's like, "I have all the things here." He's like, number one, the weather when these things happen. But he said, number two, he said, "I have everything that I could want here. I'm able to go get my paper, go get a cup of coffee. Everything's in walking distance." And I'm like, he's making a very good case here, a very good argument. So this is really important. So for me, if I think about living in New York City, if I only could pick one place and having things accessible, being able to go to a museum, a restaurant, walking in Central Park, that to me is just amazing. It's also extremely expensive. So being clear on the fact that, number one, I don't know financially what my situation will be as I age. And other really key elements to this plan is I don't know physically how I'm going to be. Am I going to require some care? Maybe part-time, maybe full-time. That's extremely expensive. Or am I going to be in a place where I need a lot of care? So plan A would be, okay, let's just say I could take care of myself. I'm independent. I'm able to take care of myself. I have the finances. I found a place in New York that I could live in and have some extra spending money. That would be my plan A. So that would be ideal for me. Now, plan B would be that I need some form of care and I don't have the finances to live in New York. So where would be another option? Well, I would really love to be closer to family. That would make me feel good, but I don't want to necessarily live with, my son and his family because I don't want that to be too much of a burden. I still want some of my independence if I can. So what is an option about an extension on his home? Or can we do what's called a granny pod in the backyard, where these little temporary houses, which are really wonderful for older people, that can hook up to a main house. You have your independence, you have your space. And then it's a beautiful thing because you can get to see each other and they know that you're safe and they're checking in on you. And that sounds really good. And also financially, it's a very viable thing for a lot of people. So that might be plan B. Now, plan C would be if, I needed a lot of care, I didn't have any funds, where would and I want to do this research ahead of time, where would there be a nursing home or some kind of facility that has a good reputation and I would feel comfortable putting my mother in, or I'd be comfortable putting myself in, which, by the way, I have to say, unfortunately, I don't know of many. So that takes a lot of research. Not saying that there aren't some, but thinking about it. So having a plan A, B, and C, and of course, the time to talk to your children, your adult children, about the possibility of you putting a granny pod in the backyard is not when you're faced with that moment of having to have it. It should be a conversation without it being a crisis in the moment, without it having to be a quick decision, with it being, maybe your son has to talk to his wife and you want to have that respect and you don't want to cause problems within the relationship. Maybe the wife does not want that. So these things should be talked about ahead of time so that if those options aren't available, you find others that are. There are, maybe some people that want to have a roommate situation. I think this is so sweet, by the way. When you're younger, in your 20s, moving out of your parents' home for the first time, you usually have a couple of roommates, right? Well, people are going back to that as they're aging. And I think it's wonderful because isolation And loneliness is one of the biggest issues that our elderly are facing right now. And so having this idea of a friends, who are now 70 and 80 or 60, 70 and 80, and having, each have their own room and having a backyard and like, a community, a little family is, and financially very friendly as well. So we want to start working on these options. What's available? Where can I go? Plan A, plan B, plan C. So you want to address that with your mom, but there's also something else. And this is an uncomfortable part of it for some people, a lot of people, but it's a very necessary part. And I happen to have a little bit of a struggle with this with both of my parents, because my dad doesn't want to talk about it a lot. He's just like, I don't want anything. I just, former doctor, former nurse. We usually don't want any extensive treatments and stuff like that to keep us, living without having quality of life. I totally understand that. We need to talk about that as well, what quality of life is to you. However, the other important thing is being very clear on, at the end of life, where do you want to be? Because I think one of the most loving things that we could always do for somebody in that last phase is supporting them in what they would want and where they want to be cared for and how they want to be cared for. Writing the Good Death book, and it has so many great, great pieces of information. It's a prescriptive book that is just wonderful. And one of the places and one of the questions I put in there to ask your loved one is, do they want warm blankets at the end of life? Would they like warm blankets? Would they like to be wrapped up in warm blankets? And I remember one of the editing, copywriting goes through a lot of layers, said, well, shouldn't you instead ask somebody if they like the room temperature? Is the room temperature warm enough, or is it warm or cold? Because, warm blankets, just when you ask about the room temperature, well, I want to tell you all this. As a former hospice and oncology nurse, when you take a warm blanket out of the warmer, that was what we had in the hospital, and you wrap somebody in that, tuck them in that warm blanket, tuck them around, tuck their feet in, I will tell you the gratitude that they have on their face, because lots of times your circulation is slowing down and your feet get really cold and you just get cold. And even if the temperature in the room might feel okay, their actual body circulation can be really cold. And so wrapping them up with warm blankets is one of the kindest, gentlest, most beautiful things you can do for somebody. So yes, I am a 2 hands up for warm blankets at the end of life. Absolutely be comfortable. You want to turn a situation where most people, obviously, we feel that at the end of life, when I don't have control over what my physical body is doing, by the way, I just want us to step into this space for a minute and remember that each and every one of us will experience this. And we've been dying for thousands of years as a human race. We know how to do this. It does not have to be scary. It's made scary because we just don't know the truth about it right now. We don't talk about it, but I promise you this, it does not have to be. In fact, quite the opposite. It can be one of the most beautiful, sacred experience that we go through. And for us caring for our loved ones, to make sure that they have exactly what they want, that they feel safe, that they feel loved, that they feel comfortable, is one of the most empowering things we can do as caregivers. So mom, where would you want to be? Well, I'd like to be at home. Okay. So making sure that we have what we need to make sure that can happen. So if mom lives in a different state, which the reality is many of our families live in different states, do we have a caregiver? It shouldn't be that the elder spouse is automatically just the main caregiver and that's going to be, and they're there. So it's all good. It's not all good. I promise you that it's not all good. An 85-year-old man taking care of an 83-year-old dying wife it cannot be done by one person. It should not be done by one person. This is the last time they have together. A doulagiver's rule of thumb is taking all of the tasking off of that caregiver, allow them to be the husband, allow them to be the wife, allow them to have this last time with their loved one, not doing all the tasking. So what in reality so I'm going to use my mom as an example. she's probably going to be upset that I'm using this, but just as an example to put in, because I want to use myself as a caregiver. Okay. So I work full time plus because we have just this beautiful institute that we work with, and we work with people all over the world. If my mom was in that situation, she lives in a different state, I'd want to be there. I'd want to make that happen. So I've already kind of flushed it out in my mind. Everything is fine now, but I've already actually thought in my mind, I'd rent an Airbnb. I'd drive up. So I have my dog with me. I have my car with me. I'd have my Airbnb with my internet so I could still do work. I would hire a doula. I'd make sure that there is extra hands of support so my dad could just be present and dealing what he's dealing with, but that my mom has really good care, and that the care is rotated, that it's not just one person doing, because it's too taxing on one person. And I will tell you, as that person gets to the end of life, the care can't be done by one person. It has to be done by two people, moving the person, just practical reasons. So asking my mom where she would want to be at the end of life, and then making a blueprint, how would that be possible? Knowing that I am wanting to show up for her and going to show up with her, how do I juggle my full-time work? And I'm so blessed to be able to do a lot of things remotely. How am I able to set up a working environment for myself, not in their house? Their house is way too small, so that wouldn't be possible, but close enough that I can be there lots of times, and then be able to go home, get some rest in a regular bedroom, and also be able to do my meetings and on call. So thinking of that, but also the key is supporting what her wishes are. Now, I need to take this a step further, because I have to have the conversation with my mother about what she would want for her life celebration, for her memorial, and who does she want there? What does she want that to look like? And I know that can be a hard place to step into. But for me, I have to tell you that I don't know all of the answers. And I want to say we've gotten halfway there. I've been trying to do this, by the way, and there's a reason for it. So I've been trying to have this conversation for 20 years with her, but I've gone at her pace because she has a very strong fear of death. I know, it's ironic. I got it. It doesn't make any sense. I know. Here I am, educating about end of life, working with over 1,000 people at the end of life, writing a book called The Good Death, doing all these things about bringing back death as the sacred natural part of life. And my own mother is completely at the other nth degree, that she is completely petrified of becoming sick and of death. And I have to meet her where she is. I can't push her. And there's reasons for that. Her past experiences, her parents died when she was very young. She thought for sure she was going to have that early end of life. So I know that there's reasons for that. And so I don't want to push her, but I also need to know certain details so that I can honor her at the highest level in what she wants. So turning this into, Mom, you can have whatever you want. Like, you can have anything and everything you want for end of life. She loves ice cream sodas. Mom, you want ice cream sodas 3 times a day? Let's do it. You turn this around into reminding them that they have choices over everything. They have choices of how they want the room decorated. They have choices of how comfortable they want to be. They have choices about what they want to eat. They have choices about who they want to come visit and who they don't, when they want those visits, how long they want those visits, how they want to be celebrated. All of the things now, we want to turn this into an empowering journey for them. But for you as the confident caregiver, being clear on what your mom or dad would want and where they want to be allows you to be able to execute that, be able to then advocate and make that happen. And that feels incredibly good, because at the end of the day, you're giving them their wish of what they wanted. It's you making the motions, taking the steps, but because they can't advocate for themselves at this point, you've had the clear conversation. You're able to say, she wants to be home. We need extra pair of hands. We need some help for dad. You're thinking about it way ahead of time. She would like flowers in the room. She would like this music playing. It's really important to do. So asking about that is critically important, and asking it ahead of time is really the key, so that you can have these conversations now. You want to know how comfortable people want to be. You want to know, again, for their services, what would they like? And at the end of this webinar, I'm going to talk about the third section, which is the amazing new choices we have, what I call the rebirth of death. And dying to be green options. So I'm going to give you some really great options that you can bring into this conversation that are financially friendly, that are environmentally friendly, and spiritually friendly, which is really beautiful. So asking her what she wants, asking her about her life celebration, so the party that she wants, if she has any special requests for that. And then again, asking her about disposition, which means where do you want to be laid to rest? What do you want to happen to this beautiful body? And I'm going to get to that in the third part. So I just want to plant that seed for you now. But knowing at the end of life where you want to be cared for, how do you want that to look? I call it a sacred space. And then what do you want for your celebration is critically important for you to have that roadmap. Remember the plan A, the plan B, and the plan C, because we just don't know all of the elements that are going to be at play when we actually get there. How much money do I actually have? The problem is people don't realize how expensive it is to live. And when we are now living in our 80s, 81, like you're not making a lot of money at that point, if any. And now you're spending a lot every year. Do you have that? Is it sustainable? So you want to make sure you have plans A, B, and C on that. Let's talk about the second phase of being a confident caregiver. The second phase of you being a confident caregiver is this. Know how to care for your loved one at the end of life. Know the skills, how to care for your loved one at the end of life. Even if you are not going to do all of the care yourself, just understanding how end of life goes and the care and the natural process that it is changes everything. I promise you, it changes everything. Most people don't know the first thing about end of life. They haven't seen it. However, when somebody is at the end of life, it's usually the family that is called to do 98% of the hands-on end of life care, even when hospice service is on board. They usually don't know the first thing about how to do this. It's a terrible model. It does not work right now. It is leaving people traumatized and just having not good end of lives, and we have to change that. So giving you back the skills of knowing the 3 phases of end of life, the interventions to use in all 3 phases, how to set a sacred space, and again, the natural way that this end of life naturally occurs changes everything. And so you want to learn those skills. And again, we offer that at Doulagivers Institute. Every month I'm on there live doing a free webinar. 90 minutes will change your life. So the level 1 end of life doula family caregiver training is on every month. You can join that. It is absolutely amazing. And if you haven't done that, please sign up and make sure that you do. The third phase, and let's get into it because the third phase is exciting. And what I want to talk to you now about is different options that are available, which are really exciting. So I think that what happened is this. We got to a place in our world where we completely removed death and death awareness from the natural life cycle that it is. With doing that, we created this incredibly intense, feared relationship with death. So people are petrified. They're running the opposite direction. They're doing crazy things to prevent the natural part of this journey. I understand how hard it is. I'm not saying that it's not, but I want to tell you this, as a former hospice and oncology nurse, we are doing things because of this fear that are creating this to be 10,000 times more difficult and more suffering. So when we start talking about death now, because we realize that that's not working, it's terrible. We start now talking about, and I really admire all the people that do work in the end of life space that are speaking up with their voices and talking about the truth about end of life, like Julie McFadden, her book, There's Nothing to Fear. And Nurse Hadley, who has a book, The In-Between, talking about the phenomenon. And you've got hospice nurse Penny that's doing her education. Barbara Carnes has been doing this for a long time, talking about the truth about end of life. And there's a common denominator there with all that we all are talking about. And we're talking about how there is nothing to fear and how there are sacred things that happen in this end of life space that if you are honored and privileged to be in a scenario that you are able to see that and witness it for yourself, not only will you not be afraid of end of life, your whole life will change. You will never look at life the same way when you have this sacred experience. You are connected to something so much greater than you ever knew. There is a whole bigger meaning here. The common things that end of life patients say, like that their loved ones who've died already are back in the room with them, helping them to cross over. It changes everything. And right now, there's so much talk about grief, right? And yes, there's traumatic grief. Why? Because if we're not talking about death being a natural part of the life cycle and we don't know anything about it, and then people die, of course it's traumatic. And of course we're going to be in this grief state. And people think they're stuck in that grief state. I promise you, when you start to learn the truth about end of life, it'll help heal your grief. I promise you that. People have said that as well. So let's talk about the beautiful things that are coming about, the rebirth of death and the options. Now, there's something that I call dying to be green. And this is really important. As I shared with you, there were 2 huge hurricanes that just whipped through multiple states, Florida, the Carolinas. I mean, just devastation. Global warming is contributing to the intensity of these events, the frequency and intensity of these events. We have to be crystal clear here that each one of us creates a footprint, creates a carbon footprint. And, you know, we do have power in the choices that we make. And one of them that is so important is what you choose for disposition. And that means where you want this beautiful gift of a body that you've been given laid to rest, because it is a gift that you've been given to have this human experience with. What do you want to happen to it after you die? So let's get very clear. There's no judgment in any choices, and there's no judgment in anything that I share. But we have to be clear about the choices and the ramifications of the choices. Because when I'm talking to people, they don't know they have choices. So they're not aware of the different choices that are available now, and they're not aware of the impact environmentally that some of these choices are had. So let's just talk about what you call a traditional funeral, which tradition is really the wrong word for it. But for the sake of what we're going to say a traditional funeral that the body gets embalmed. So the blood is drained from the body and the body is now filled with toxic chemicals. I mean, it's kind of mind blowing, but that's okay. And if I can just share with you that the reason that the modern embalming started is because in the Civil War, they started to try to find a way to preserve the soldiers' bodies so that they could be brought home to their loved ones. So they came up with this embalming, taking the blood out and putting this fluid in that would help that the body would not decompose. Why it's stuck, I have no idea. We do not need to embalm people. It's not required by law. It's incredibly toxic. It's incredibly toxic to the person that's administering the embalming. It's incredibly toxic to the environment. So just stay with me for a minute and let's picture this. We have 78 million people over the age of 65 in the United States at this very moment. If each one of those people at the end of life chose to be embalmed and go and be buried in a non-biodegradable casket with, you know, cement liners and wood that doesn't break down and all of those things, and put into the earth, what do you think would happen? What do you see happening already? That our earth is completely compromised with the pollution and the damage that we've done to it. And again, I am not trying to be judgmental. I'm being very clear and making clear observations that if we don't try to remedy some of the things that are happening now, you are going to see You were going to see towns wiped out like we saw in Asheville, North Carolina, which is the most mind-boggling, heartbreaking scenario of floods happening and just wiping away and killing hundreds of people in a swoop. You're going to see states like Florida being, if this hurricane, this past hurricane the eye did not break apart right before it hit landfall, they were looking at mass destruction across the whole entire state of Florida. We got lucky this time. We're not going to continue to be lucky. We've got to make some conscious choices here. So what are the options? There are so many great things coming about. So the first one I want to share with you is what's called a natural burial. And a natural burial means that you will go back into the earth without being embalmed, without toxic chemicals, which again seep into the soil and go into the plant source and all of the things that are very harmful. And if you go in your natural state and you're wrapped in something that is biodegradable, like a pine box or a shroud, you will eventually go back to earth, compost. So that is one choice. The second choice is called water cremation. So I know you know of fire cremation, but did you know that fire cremation, and again, if it's something that is your religion or your culture, of course, you should always follow that. Follow whatever feels right to you, but please know you have options. And know that these options have a real impact. These choices have an impact. You know, the fact that I have an impact on this planet and world years after I'm not physically here anymore is empowering to me. So there's something called a water cremation now, or an aquamation, and it mimics the natural way that the body decomposes quickly. So it goes into an alkaline hydrolysis fluid, and the body just goes into, it's reduced into its natural minerals. And it's a fraction of the cost of traditional funerals. Now, again, many families that I have worked with said that they weren't prepared for the end of life for their loved one. They weren't prepared for planning. They didn't know what they wanted. And they ended up spending so much more money on a funeral because they just weren't thinking. They were in grief. They were vulnerable, the whole thing. Choosing ahead not only creates a ritual, it allows you to really tailor this to what you want, but it saves you so much money at the same time. And it saves the planet and the climate. So you've got natural burial, you've got water cremation, and now you've got something called human composting, which is where you will be put into a composting machine and actually made into compost. And people are bringing that compost and putting it into the soil, into their gardens and into the soil. And then there's a lot that's made. And so some is then donated to forest areas. What I want to say about the three options are this. Number one, you want to always, and your cemeteries are supposed to always have an area for natural burials. That's not always apparent or clear. So you want to make sure, and again, to do this ahead of time, is where is my closest natural burial plot? So you want to know that, you want to ask about that. And then for the water cremation and the human composting, they're not legal in every United States state yet. So you want to find the ones that are, and you're able to have your body shipped. They will actually do that. But more and more states are bringing them on and legalizing them because they're a wonderful option. I think we've really got to rally our hearts and go forward with what are the small, medium, and large changes we can make that can contribute in a positive way to reduce climate change. And all of us can play a role in that. So I know that we always say, okay, well, we need this president elected to make it better. We need this president elected to make it better. We need this bill passed. But I want to tell you something, and you know as well as I do, sometimes to get those things done takes forever, if at all. And I also want you to know that you've got the power. You've got the power of choice every single day in how you live your life and how you choose to show up in this world with kindness rather than with, anger and judgment, and with making choices, because these choices, and if we all made them, that changes the world. That's how we change the world. So your green choices are natural burial, are water cremation, and are of human composting. And I want to tell you that the financial part of that for people, which is a big consideration. You know, when did dying get so expensive? When did it become so expensive to die? Well, it did. And so we don't want that to be part of this. So you want to think on so many different avenues, what is important to you, and build a ritual around it. And I want to tell you about the next choice that you have that you want to think about and talk to your mom, your dad about, is having a home wake. Mhm. You know, 100 years ago, people died, average age was 46. People were cared for at home. They died at home. They stayed at home for the wake. And so, doesn't it make sense that if your mom has her end of life at home, why are we sending her somewhere else? Maybe my sister and I want to come together and dress her and share stories and treat her body with that loving kindness, and then allow people to come in to pay their respects. What about that? And again, you know, these rituals can be so healing for your grief and your bereavement journey. They've shown that taking time and slowing down when somebody has their end of life directly after they die, it's imprinted on exactly how that grief and bereavement will go. So I want you to know that you have choices. So let's recap today. Being a confident caregiver, you have three main phases. You want to plan ahead with those questions that we asked, with plan A, B, and C, and some other questions that you want to think about. You want to learn how to, second phase, you want to learn how to care for somebody at the end of life. You want to learn what that looks like. Even if you're not going to be doing the care, knowing what that looks like helps you to be really grounded and present when these situations come up. And number three, you want to know about the rebirth of death options, dying to be green, home wakes and funerals, and just really know that there is a whole rebirth being happening here about positive ways to not only have end of life, but to have your grief and bereavement. And I'll tell you this, and this is Doulagiver's Pearl, is when we bring back the awareness that end of life will be part of our journey, it makes you live life every single day, whether you're conscious of it or not, a very different level of appreciation and gratitude. And that is really the key to being happy in life mastery. So it's a win-win across the board. Now, I want to share with you all that we at Doulagivers have a course called the Confident Caregiver Course, and it is amazing. It is everything that you could ever want to know about all of these details. It has all of your choices in it. It has all of your training on how to care for somebody at the end of life, the award-winning level 1 training. It's got all your options built out, laid out, links for them, references, resources for all of the choices, including body donation and all the things that you want to know, how to talk to children about end of life. It's got a symptom comfort tracker that's built in, so you know what the comfort level for all of the things you want to assess for your loved one at the end of life, and actually have a tracker to keep it organized. It's got a support system scheduler, so you know how to rotate the care, and you can have things that are already there. And I have to tell you that course is $997, and it is an absolute amazing course. What I want to tell you today is this, that course is free for you when you buy 3 of the Good Death books. When you pre-order 3 copies of the Good Death book, which is amazing. So what we're asking you to do is this. We want to create change for everyone in this world. And the Good Death book is really like what to expect when you're expecting having a baby, but for the other end of life. This book should be in everyone's home, because each and every one of us are going to be called at some point, and we're going to need this. So what we're asking of you right now is a celebration on this pre-launch, and what we're doing is to take 3 books, take 1 for you, and give 2 away. And give 2 away to people, because we know that everyone's going to need that. And as a thank you for that, you get the Confident Caregiver, a $997 value, for free. So this is available right now. It is available for a time limit. And we're really happy to be able to do it, because we know the course changes lives. We know the book changes lives. And if we can mobilize together to make this shift, to bring back the sacredness of death, and it brings back the sacredness of life, we will see a shift in the world, and we're doing it together. So if you want the Confident Caregiver course, get it now for free with the link below. You just get the 3 books, keep one, and give 2 away as a thank you. You get the Confident Caregiver course for free. So that is for a time limit. So again, please make sure that you grab that. It is invaluable. It is so special. And if you have any questions, let us know. We will be happy to answer them. Again, remember that death can be the natural, sacred experience it was meant to be, and it can go really, really well with the right education, the right kindness, and the right support. My name is Suzanne O'Brien. This was Ask a Death Doula. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Love you so much. Put your questions below. Get the Confident Caregiver course. Love you guys so much, and I'll see you in class.